When World War II ended, the bulk of the Royal Indian Navy, RIN, was berthed at Bombay. There were thousands of battle-hardened naval ratings, young ordinary sailors, milling about, waiting to be kicked out of the Navy. The many shore establishments of RIN in Bombay were overcrowded with shoddy living and working conditions.
I am in the RIN since 12 years. I got the British Empire medal. The rice that was given was bad and full of stones. The atta was old. The meat supplied was stale.
Extract from the report of the 1946 RIN Mutiny Inquiry Commission. 300 ratings of the draft reserve had been accommodated in HMIS Talwar in accommodation meant for 120. Besides this, there were about 700 other ratings in the establishment under training, and there was considerable overcrowding.
They could no longer afford a navy that was so big. So they needed to demobilize, they needed to reduce.
The majority of RIN ratings waiting to be demobilized were very young, in the 17 to 25 years old range. Lured by false promises, they had had their dreams dashed. Many of them having faced discrimination at the hands of India's colonial masters.
Lieutenant Commander Bond often kicked me and also other ratings. Lieutenant Koltham also behaved in a similar manner. We were many a time served food cooked in salt water. Lieutenant Koltham, when requested, would call us "fuck off."
There was racial discrimination, there was unpalatable food, there was bad, living condition. This was creating a big, anger in these ratings. And because they had given their life, they had fought for them, they won battles for them, and yet they were being treated like this.
I come from South Travancore. I am a Syrian Christian. I was ill-treated. When I was in training on HMS Bahadur, I was hit by an officer who was on loan from the Royal Navy.
The world around these agitated young Indians was changing, and they realized that their country was on the cusp of great change. The young sailors of the RIN felt they were playing no part in hastening the freedom that was to come.
They used to call themselves Azad Hindis, and that was obviously because being hugely influenced by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's INA, and it's from the same people against whom INA has rebelled, and look what they have achieved, in the Far East, in Singapore, and etc. And all this made them, eager to do something for and contribute to freedom movement, the independence movement, and this escalated everything.
On 30th November 1945, certain slogans were written in places in HMIS Talwar in anticipation of the Navy Day celebrations.
They pulled down the flags, the British flags, and signed, and wrote everywhere "Down with the British" and "Kill the British" and "Quit India," etc. They repeated this again in the sometime in January.
The authorities took every precaution to prevent slogan writing and sabotage. Night patrol was intensified. Floodlights were mounted on the parade grounds. We could feel the tension as darkness descended on the Talwar.
And this was on the eve of the visit of the chief of the defense staff in India. And this is when he was caught with a gum bottle.
On 16 February 1946, leading telegraphist B.C. Dutt was summarily tried by the order of the Flag Officer Bombay, and a report on this matter was sent to the NHQ. At this stage, B.C. Dutt was placed under open arrest.
Such things were happening at the time. Of course, the numbers increased with time, and it became a group of 400 to 500 people, and they could gradually influence the rest of the signal school and the other shore establishments within Bombay.
Mahatma Gandhi's famous Dandi March. The salt touched everyone's daily life. All India was aroused. This gave us the idea we should take on that aspect of barrack life which concerned all the ratings. We decided to incite the ratings on the Talwar against bad food. They must refuse to eat.
On 17 February 1946, the cooks in the 2 vegetarian messes in HMIS Talwar mixed dal with vegetables and made a preparation for serving on mess decks, which to say the least was of an unusual kind. The ratings in those 2 messes refused to eat food on the ground, that it was uneatable.
In Navy, when more than 3 people protest on the same subject, that becomes a mutiny.
There were so many mutinies during the war, 9 mutinies between 42 to 45. So clearly the leadership needed to do something about it, which they had not done.
On the morning of the 18th of February, breakfast was refused by a very large number of ratings on HMIS Talwar. They started making a noise and shouting slogans and declined to fall in for parade.
Even when the bugle was sounded, they didn't get up. When they came out, they just came out shouting, "No food, no work."
Through the day of 18th February, messages and rumours began to fly thick and fast from HMIS Talwar to the other ships and shore establishments in Bombay and beyond.
The CEO, the commanding officer of Signal School Talwar, called them sons of coolies and sons of bees and all that sort of thing. That day they struck work.
By noon, there were cries of Inquilab Zindabad and Quit India echoing across the Talwar. The ratings were in open revolt. The flag officer commanding, FOB, Rear Admiral Rattray, rushed to the Talwar.
At 1700 hours, the Flag Officer Bombay again visited Talwar and addressed the ratings, informing them that Captain Inigo Jones was taking over command from Commander King and instructing them to appoint representatives who should be prepared with a list of their grievances.
On February 18, the Talwar stood defiant but alone and utterly helpless. We did not have access to even a serviceable rifle. If something was not done soon, instead of being a pillar of the freedom fight, we would be without a prop for our own future. Somehow, we had to get support from the seamen from the nearby shore establishment, Castle Barracks.
By the next morning, the 19th of February, the news of what Talwar had done had spread to all the naval establishments in and around Bombay. The Free Press Journal ran a front-page 4-deck headline, "Indian naval men in city on hunger strike. Insulting behavior of CO infuriates the ratings. Authorities get panicky."
For 5 days, every newspaper, not just in India, but all over the world, carried banner headlines, and they, all of our front page was full of the stories about the naval rebellion, etc.
Ratings began to pour out of RIN establishments, till there were 10,000 of them marching towards the harbour. They boarded RIN ships, and on each ship the white ensign of the Union Jack was pulled down. Through the morning, these charged up young sailors went around the nearby areas of Bombay, calling on shops to down shutters. European establishments that did not comply became outlets of their anger. British symbols, signs and flags were targeted. The ratings gathered on the parade ground of HMIS Talwar.
By sundown on February 19, the Talwar was no longer alone. Nearly 20,000 ratings from all the 11 shore establishments in Bombay and all the ships in the harbour had hauled down the Union Jack.
What was happening on the ground and at sea in Bombay caught the British unprepared. The fears and nightmares from 1857, almost a century ago, were being revisited, as not just naval establishments, but army and air force units across British-ruled India began to stir in sympathy with the ratings in Bombay.
It spread across, nearly 100 ships and shore establishment, 20,000 sailors. That was almost 2/3 of the Navy's strength at that time.
When the call for strike went from HMIS Talwar, each and every ship and shore establishment of the Royal Indian Navy in Bombay rose against the British. It lit a fire that raced across the country. It was a moment pivotal in history, to be remarked only for its absence in the years to come.
So the RIN revolt was a great reminder to the British that once ideas of sedition, rebellion, revolt, Indian nationalism, once they reach the services, the army, the navy, the police, the bureaucracy, there is absolutely no way in which the British can stay in India.
With 20,000 ratings on strike, involving almost every RIN ship in Bombay harbour and every RIN shore establishment in its vicinity, a central authority was needed to coordinate matters and lead the strike.
They sat together and elected a body. A Muslim, MS Khan, was made the president. Madan Singh was vice president. There were there were 15 people. Their aim was to actually give the navy to the independent in India on a platter and say, here you are. We are no more British Navy.
With the dawn of the 20th February in Bombay, it was the first big day in command for the strikers. The ratings were now organized with a strike committee directing affairs. The British authorities were tense, having been taken by surprise, facing such an unexpected resistance from such lowly placed sailors.
The Royal Indian Navy sailors, having operated all over and seen that they were no less, now were far less inclined to take this sort of treatment than before the war.
On Wednesday the 20th, a large number of mutineers paraded round the streets of Bombay. The Flag Office of Bombay issued an order that all ratings were to return to their ships or establishments by 15:30 hours. Ratings found in Bombay after this time would be arrested. Military pickets were posted outside Talwar and Castle Barracks to stop men leaving those establishments.
At HMIS Talwar, military police surrounding the signal school refused to let the sailors step out and buy food. The hungry ratings had not eaten since the previous day. Tensions rose as the desperate seamen broke open the family canteen and started shouting anti-British slogans. The military police opened fire, further enraging the striking ratings. They broke open the armory, grabbed guns and fired back. The mutiny reached its peak on 21 February 1946 a day characterized by violence and high drama.
The second day there was a exchange of fire, and so it was all getting into a very complicated and a very volatile situation.
The Cochrane, Flag Officer Commanding Royal Indian Navy, Vice Admiral J.H. Godfrey, had flown down to Bombay from Delhi. Twice he met the strike committee representatives, led by leading seaman Khan, and each time his message was clear: return to duty and we will look into your food and injustice grievances.
About 9 a.m., Indian soldiers opened fire on the ratings in the castle barracks. With the first shot, the resolution of non-violence went up in smoke. The ratings rushed to action station. Years of training had prepared them for that.
The sound of firing was heard by the men aboard the ships. The president of the strike committee warned the men that they might have to take up battle positions to defend themselves in the dockyard.
On the 21st, the military guard tried to prevent ratings coming out from the castle barracks. The result was a disturbance ending in firing by the military.
Across naval establishments, ratings broke open armories, collected arms and ammunition to take up battle positions.
So the intentions of the sailors at that time, or their resentment or anger at the imperial symbols, is quite palpable and evident.
As the strike spread across the RIN establishments, the ratings were facing the prospect of fighting their war of independence on empty stomachs.
The British thought that they would starve them and they would put them without water, and then they would surrender.
Ordinary people from Bombay had been gathering around the Gateway of India, carrying food packets.
The restaurants all around, Irani restaurants and the other people, even private families, would actually throw food packets to them inside the shore establishment, or make sure that some of them go by a boat and deliver.
Boats began to arrive from the ships to collect food. Indian soldiers deployed there helped sailors load their boats with provisions. Bombay seemed to have rallied behind the naval mutineers. The sound of gunfire broke out again. This time, a young signaller on the roof of Castle Barracks was seen sending a message with flags that the British troops were attacking them from all sides, and they were answering bullet for bullet. Ships in harbour joined in the defence of Castle Barracks. The Punjab opened up from the 12-pounder mounted on deck and followed it up with concentrated fire from the Hurricane and anti-aircraft guns. Some 120 rounds were fired. The HMIS Ord opened with her 12-pounder. When Castle Barracks came under attack, the Central Strike Committee shifted the operational headquarters to HMIS Narbada, the most modern sloop of the RIN. And all ships in harbour were told to raise steam and prepare for action. The British on their side were taking no chances. Royal Air Force, RAF Mosquitoes, as planned, had arrived. 3 Coast Battery guns were manned at Oyster Rock and Middle Ground, directed on RIN ships. Royal Marine Amphibian regiments were placed at strategic points. The Strike Committee went ahead with their defensive preparations. 3 ships, Clive, Khyber and Lawrence, moored near the Gateway of India, prepared to resist any offensive from that end. The Narbada, Jumna and Kumaun near the dockyard, covered the Ballard Estate area. A signal was relayed to all ships that any hostile movement around these ships should be fired on.
They did not change the code of the Morse. All their messages were being intercepted by the British.
They did not so much intend to prevent the British from knowing, as much that they intended their own actions to be choreographed well.
So the British knew their moves, but none of the moves were so secretive, because they were very open about that we are going to do this, we are going to do that, even to faraway ships.
On the gates of Talwar and Castle Barracks last night.
At 2:30 p.m., All India Radio broadcast a chilling address by the flag officer commanding the Royal Indian Navy, Admiral Godfrey.
I want again to make it quite plain that the Government of India will never give in to violence. To continue the struggle is the height of folly when you take into account the overwhelming forces at the disposal of the government at this time, and which will be used to the uttermost, even if it means the destruction of the Navy, of which we have been so proud.
In some ways, it was a direct reflection of his leadership of the Indian Navy. I mean, after all, any navy that has a mutiny has to think seriously. And he blotted his copybook by talking of destruction.
By now, news was trickling in from other parts of India, where not just RIN establishments, but even Air Force and Army units were proving to being restive. An RAF squadron, which had been ordered to proceed to Bombay, was grounded at Jodhpur when every aircraft mysteriously developed engine trouble. In Karachi, an intense battle had ensued between HMIS Hindustan in harbour and the British forces on land.
The unfortunate part was that on the day when this happened at 10 o'clock, it was low tide, and Hindustan went down with low tide, with the result that Britishers were shooting from the top and these young boys were shooting from below. So they were at a massive disadvantage, and therefore a whole lot of them were killed.
In Bombay, it was obvious from the Fokhran's threat that the British had amassed enough reinforcements to run over the defensive positions. General Headquarters in Delhi had announced strong naval and military reinforcements are on their way to Bombay, Karachi and Pune. In London, Prime Minister Attlee announced that 7 battleships, including HMS Glasgow, anchored at Trincomalee, were heading full steam to Bombay. Hearing of the imminent arrival of the HMS Glasgow, the mood amongst the ratings was grim, and it was under the shadow of this threat that the strike committee met to review the situation, discuss future plans, and most importantly, issue a statement to the press. The Free Press Journal carried this appeal from the ratings to the national political leaders. We appeal to you all, particularly to the leaders of the Congress, Muslim League and Communist parties. Use all your might to prevent the bloodbath in Bombay. We await your reply. The naval uprising and the events unfolding put the two main national parties at a tough spot. The dilemma for the National Congress and the Muslim League was that sentiment was strongly in favor of the mutineers, and it would not make political sense to go against the tide. But it also did not suit them to openly support a rebellion against the British.
The Indian nationalists did feel that this episode, it's a bad time for it to happen. This is the time to negotiate independence. The terms had changed. Earlier on, negotiations would happen very much as a vantage point of strength for the British. But now things had changed. The rule of the game had changed, and this was a better time to bargain, the better time for a negotiated settlement.
Sardar Patel issued a statement asking naval ratings to lay down their arms and surrender. Congress President Maulana Azad also pressed the ratings to call off the strike. Muhammad Ali Jinnah issued a statement from Calcutta. I appeal to the men and ratings to call off the strike and to the public in general not to add to the difficulties of the situation. The Apostle of Peace did not support the uprising. In one of his statements he said, they were thoughtless and ignorant if they believed that by their might they would deliver India from foreign domination. On February 22nd, Bombay woke up to what would become the bloodiest day of the naval mutiny. A day when the political leadership of India, having turned their backs, it was left to the ordinary citizens to face British tanks and bullets in support of the strikers. The previous day, the Communist Party of India had issued a call to observe Hartal in support of the strikers.
There was a great deal of communist support for it. They mobilized people, and that mobilization definitely played a role. There was a psychological moment for the Indian communists, end of the war, victory of the Allied forces, victory of the USSR, this whole narrative that the forces of fascism have been defeated by socialism. So this was a great moment. Also, weakening of British imperialism. So they felt that the time is ripe now for a big overthrow of the British rule.
At about 11 a.m., a message from the Cochrane was delivered to the ratings over a loudhailer. They were told that the army had assumed control in Bombay.
By then, it went around all over Bombay that these boys, a whole lot of them were killed, and that in no time, these innocent boys who were only protesting for the independence of the country will be killed.
In a show of strength, a formation of RAF aircraft flew over the harbour at 2:20 p.m. The ratings had been told that the aircraft would not take any offensive action, provided no action was taken against them. At around 2:30 p.m., the city exploded and pitched battles began. Barricades were thrown up in various parts of the city by the locals, and behind them proudly fluttered the flags of the Congress, Muslim League and the Communist Party of India. There were street battles across the city, and blood flowed freely. There were eyewitness reports of British troops firing on crowds. There were reports of European-owned establishments being vandalized as Bombay spiraled out of control. News of the street fight spread like wildfire, and the fighting became more intense. The ratings on their commandeered ship took boats to the gateway of India, but were stopped from coming ashore by British soldiers armed to the hilt with machine guns, pointing at the landing parties.
The Britishers brought in the army, they brought in the Royal Navy from elsewhere, they brought in artillery, and they brought in the Royal Air Force. So they responded in a completely disproportionate way.
Bombay was left scarred, with the death toll in the clashes being the highest recorded for the times. According to official records, more than 400 people were killed and over 1,500 injured in Bombay.
For sure, there was not even a little space or leave alone bed, but not even a little space in any hospital to treat the injured or wounded. And surely this figure is fudged. There were civilians. It was a complete mayhem on the streets of Bombay.
Reality stared the striking ratings in the face. With the national parties not ready to back them, with the prospect of an all-out bloody war, which could have only one possible outcome, the uprising of the RIN was doomed to die. The president of the strike committee, M.S. Khan, read out the message from Sardar Patel. In the present unfortunate circumstances that have developed, the advice of the Congress to the RIN ratings is to lay down arms and go through the formality of the surrender which has been asked for. The Muslim League too had similar messages for the Muslims amongst the strikers. The strike committee met for the final time at 11:30 p.m. of 22nd February 1946. They had to decide on whether to surrender or not. British naval authorities had given a deadline of 6:30 a.m., after which full military force would be used against them. It was nearly 6, with barely half an hour to the deadline, that the decision to surrender was arrived at. A signal was sent. To the General RIN, all ships hoist black flag, remain quiet on board, will endeavour to send rations. It was all over.